Welcome to NFL Draft Week, where one of three things will happen to the Minnesota Vikings. It's the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers, I appreciate you all so very much. Those of you who have been with me throughout this entire draft process, through all kinds of quarterback talk, trade talk, talking about defensive linemen, everything that we have done here, a couple of mock drafts even. And a special thank you as well to anybody who's new here to Locked On Vikings, who's checking this thing out for the first time. It's draft week, you're trying to bone up, and I am here for you. So to the everydayers, there's going to be a lot of recapping this week, and I apologize for that. But for everybody who is new, hello and welcome. You can, of course, find this show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is a podcast listening app like, say, SiriusXM, or Amazon Fire and Roku. If you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app, or you can just flick it on YouTube. Just search out Locked On Vikings wherever you listen to shows. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, today on the show, for recap reasons, for people who are new here or just to sort of realign, there are three major theories as to what will happen to the Minnesota Vikings in this NFL draft, what the Vikings will do in this NFL draft. It's the kind of three categories of thing. There's the big trade up to 3 to get Drake May, maybe even 2 if you're super conspiratorial, but probably not. There is a more modest trade up to 4 or 5 that gets JJ McCarthy. That will probably be cheaper in a non-insignificant way. Or there is no trade up happens at all. They stick and pick at 11. They either take a defender and then they get a quarterback later, or they just take Michael Penix or something at 11. And we'll go over all of these possibilities. We'll go over the actual quarterbacks themselves again. Look, here's the thing with these quarterbacks. Of the top 7 QBs in the draft, that's Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, and Spencer Rattler. Those 7 guys have all gotten at least one show here on Locked On Vikings. So if you're interested in just hearing about those guys, go search through the library, scroll through, find old episodes. You can go listen to kind of more focused in analysis of them. It's going to be a lot of recapping now. But also you can find analysis of those guys on my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, all free to watch, big, long breakdowns of all of those guys. So even if you're not a Vikings fan and you're just looking for quarterback information, if you know somebody who's a Vikings fan or something, send them those videos because that's where I think the best work for me is. Anyways, what I want to do today is just talk about the circumstances and what needs to happen for each of those scenarios to go down. And you'll notice that trade down isn't one that I think is plausible here. The Vikings already took a second rounder and traded it up. If you missed that, the Vikings took their second rounder this year and their second rounder next year, packaged it up with Houston to make a first rounder. So they get the 23rd overall pick, which was actually originally the Browns, went to Houston in the Deshaun Watson trade. Then Houston turned that into 2 seconds. One of those seconds went back to Buffalo for Stephon Diggs. So he's involved in this now in a tangential way. And there was an interesting report from Adam Schefter about that, where he said that, Houston called Minnesota, not the other way around, which everybody was like, wait, whoa, are the Vikings even going to trade up? I think that I don't buy it. I think that's a baloney. I think it's hullabaloo. Not that Adam Schefter is fake news, but that he is a mouthpiece for certain entities sometimes. And I don't really believe that Houston would just call Minnesota, offer them a trade that favors Houston greatly, not even close. And that Kwesi, analytics guy, would take that trade up if he weren't part of a grander plan, if it didn't service what they actually want to do. So that to me sounds like smoke, and the real, the real earwig in the pudding is to that theory is that is just how unprofitable that trade with Houston was for the Minnesota Vikings, depending on how you devalue a future second, but assuming you devalue it by a round, or if you devalue it by like 10%, which a lot of analytics people will, it's very uneven in favor of the Texans. And that is using the measurement tools that Kwesi tends to use. So it's not just like Kwesi fell asleep and took a bad deal. He knows that it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal by the same standards he's used in the past. Why would he do that? What would that be in service of? And the idea is that sometimes, second round picks don't sound as good as first round picks. And he probably thought that would make the negotiation easier. That is part of what helps us get up to possibly pick 3. So 2 major questions. 1, how do you get up to pick 3? How are you going to move New England off the pick? And 2, if you do move New England off the pick, who is the quarterback that you are taking? There's some dynamic things to this. Part of that is what Washington does. Washington, by most, but not all of the reporting, is pretty locked in on Jaden Daniels. So you'll have Caleb Williams. He is going to be a Bear at number 1. That is all but confirmed, as confirmed as you kind of can get. They'll still take their whole 15 minutes on draft night to do it, probably for the sake of the TV broadcast, so prepare to be annoyed about that, but he's a Bear. Jaden Daniels, probably a Commander. Not certain. They've been very close to the vest about that, as much as they can, but there are connections with Cliff Kingsbury, the air raid that he ran at Arizona State. That whole thing is there. They seem to like him. So let's pencil that in. So let's pencil in Jaden Daniels as a Commander. Then you're looking at Drake May and JJ McCarthy. There are people in the world that have JJ McCarthy over Drake May. There are people in the world, many of whom comment on these videos on YouTube, that would put Penix over Drake May and JJ McCarthy. But by and large, consensus is pretty clear, and there's a pretty big gap in once you aggregate everybody together that Drake May is like the next guy on the board. And many people have him over Jaden. I think consensus has him even over Jaden Daniels. But of the people available, Drake May is far and away the guy. In terms of if you get up to 3. So then the question becomes, does New England want that? Are they into that? Are they the team that's going to take that Drake May thing? Now, the thing about Drake May is there's some rawness. There's some stuff with his footwork. We'll do an episode like talking about the QBs as like a class later, and I'll go into more detail on it later in the week. But suffice to say, there are some issues that might keep him off the field for a little while. That might make him not quite ready to excel. And those issues in particular are exacerbated by pressure. And the Patriots just lost Trent Brown. They've got O-line issues. Their best receiver is KJ Osborne. There's some issues over there in New England. And is this the roster that if you throw Drake May into this fire, is it going to ruin him? It's a genuine concern. And it's one that maybe is overblown by people in the Vikings world trying to trade up. But maybe it's not. Maybe that's really what they're thinking. The rumor mill has been slowly ticking toward, I talked about this on Friday's show, it's slowly been ticking toward the Patriots being a little more willing to do this than you would think. They need a quarterback. They have access to Drake May. They should slam it. But maybe they won't because they don't think that their team is in the right place to make that kind of, career-altering decision. Maybe they want to build things up a little bit better. Or use their assets, their number 3 overall pick, get a huge haul from the Vikings, and then they use picks 11 and 23 to build up the offense around the guys, and then they use their second rounder, which would be pick 34, pick 35, and then they would take somebody like Michael Penix and say, okay, and now you're going into a potentially better situation, and maybe they feel that has a better chance at success. That's what you're hoping for. And in terms of what it will cost, It's hard to say. That's obviously going to be a difficult thing for reporters to get a hold of. But the 2 first rounders this year and your 2025 first are probably almost certainly going to be involved. And then it's a question of if you do more, if you get something back, which would be very surprising. If you have to give up like maybe next year's third or something like that. There's also talk of, what about a Justin Jefferson trade? But that's never really gotten anywhere. Never really been more than fan speculation. So I don't think a player gets involved here. It's just a matter of how much draft capital. But it's probably those 3 first-round picks and then some. Then you get to the next trade, the sort of modest one, the 4th or 5th for JJ McCarthy kind of thing in that whole situation. So that's what we'll talk about next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 on your first bet, win or lose. Look, it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. You can go bet on the Wolves to kick the crap out of the Suns again, or whatever else is going on in the world of hockey. I guess there are some teams there. A team moved? I didn't even know there were in Arizona Coyotes. That's how big of a hockey fan I am. You can find those kinds of things. You can find draft props. There's been some weird rumors that JJ McCarthy might be the 2nd one overall. I don't buy it, but if you do, you can maybe even go try to gamble on that. Find it all at FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. No matter what, that's $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. For the competitive animal inside of you, for the true demon that will alienate all your friends. That's what Monopoly's always been for over all of the years. We all grew up playing it, and now you can get a twist on the hit board game right there on your phone. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. And not only can you play the game as classic, if they land on your property, you get to charge them rent, that kind of thing. You can rob them. You can do bank heists in this game. It rocks. And you can also take a wrecking ball to their entire property. And if they get mad at you, you just get to say skill issue, because it's all fair game in Monopoly Go. So go get yourself on those Monopoly charts. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store and Google Play. Thanks a million for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. If you are looking for a good mock draft, not just something some writer puked out in the middle of the night with a deadline half an hour away. No. We worked hard on this thing. The Locked On NFL mock draft, which you can find on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast feed, is amazing. All 32 of us Locked On hosts got together, did a whole mock draft, and I worked very hard to try and trade up. I won't tell you if I was successful or not, but go listen to it. You'll see what happened there. And you can listen to reactions from all the other hosts and from other local experts, college hosts, etc. You can find that once again on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast feed. So let's move on to the next thing that can happen here. If the Vikings do not get up to pick 3, if they don't make that big haul, that big trade, right? Many first round picks flying around, day 2 capital maybe, day 3 capital maybe. If that doesn't go down, the Vikings might make a trade up still, but a more sensible one. And I really wanted to make sure that I kept that separate categories. There is, we traded the farm to go get our guy. And then there's we sort of put a lid on it. We didn't want to overpay, and we got a guy we're still pretty happy with. And that guy almost certainly would be JJ McCarthy. If you go by consensus, if you go by the rumors and stuff, JJ McCarthy will go between 4 and 6, is sort of the opinion du jour everywhere. If he falls past 6, I think that would surprise a lot of people. If he goes higher, it would surprise most people. Some people are like way high on him, having second quarterback or whatever, but most people agree that he'll go 4, 5, 6, something like that. So if the Vikings want him, they're probably going to have to trade there. And the reason it's 4, 5, 6 is that the Giants are maybe a little bit not so happy with their Daniel Jones situation. And if JJ McCarthy is sitting there on the board, they might just go slam it. The Giants also, it's been rumored, could be in on trying to trade up to 3 with the New England Patriots, but I don't know that it was implied that it was more like an opportunism rather than like this, we're going to force the issue, we must do this, because ultimately they could take Rome Odunze at 6 and be perfectly happy with that, go give Daniel Jones another weapon and see if this thing works out. He's only in the second year of his extension. So that's that part of the situation. But really, I think the debate here between this trading up to 4 or 5 and to leapfrog the Giants and the trade up to 3 is going to be about cost, right? It probably costs you like a full first rounder less to do the trade up to 4 than it does to do the trade up to 3. And that won't make a lot of sense on like the trade charts, like the 3rd and 4th pick aren't that different, but it's QB3 to QB4. And the gap between, at least consensus opinion, of Drake May and JJ McCarthy is like 20 spots, at least if you're using Arif Hassan's consensus board, which he'll be updating throughout the week. But as it stands, I mean, JJ McCarthy is like the 20-something best player in the draft, while Drake May is like top 5 for everybody, right? So that drop off will be reflected in the price. When it comes to quarterback, the rules are a little different, and that kind of thing will like matter, right? It much more than is it the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th overall pick. And honestly, the 4th and the 5th overall pick might even cost something super similar, because whoever doesn't make that trade between Arizona and the Chargers gets Marvin Harrison Jr. Or a trade down of their own, right? And the understanding for a long time has been that both Arizona and the Chargers are willing to play ball there. So getting turned away because they're just super in love with Marvin Harrison. It depends on, the offer and all that stuff, but they're at least willing to negotiate and you can maybe figure something out. So it's a little more doable. It's a little bit more sensible. And then the question is, how bummed are you that it's JJ McCarthy instead of Drake May? And I'll use those two names as the proxy, even though, surprises can happen. But how bummed are you about that, right? Now, again, I will defer to the many hours of content that I've made on JJ McCarthy. You can, and the big long article I wrote out Wide Left, all of that stuff you can find, and get a more fleshed out opinion. But basically, JJ McCarthy's whole gig is that he was on this championship Michigan team. They didn't have to pass a lot, both because the run game for Michigan was really good. The pass game was not very good. And in my opinion, very little of that was JJ McCarthy's fault. A lot of people would argue with me there. You can fall on that, on either side of that coin, however you want. But if you ask me, it was kind of everybody else's fault. And they were also like ahead by 3 scores at halftime every game. So they were just running out the clock half the time. But that said, you've got this, he threw 12 passes a game. Why is he this big giant, guy? I like a lot of what he does. I like the rhythm for the most part. I love the scramble drill. I love how he solves problems when they arise. Not a great deep ball. That's the book on JJ McCarthy. So if you're okay with that, if you're stoked on that, I'll say, not even okay with it. If you're happy with that, then that is available to you without necessarily mortgaging 3 years of drafts. That could be an attractive option, right? That's the whole idea, is you're trying to manage the cost. Personally, it depends on the difference, right? If the difference is 2 whole first round picks, I don't know, then you start to get weird. But it's like if you're really into one guy and you're just a little bit into another guy, the extra cost when it comes to quarterback gets to feel really trivial really fast when you remember this is potentially the franchise QB. I mean, this is a decision that if it is nailed, if they get it right, could be the thing that finally brings a Lombardi to Minnesota. And is actually maybe the singular thing that has the biggest likelihood to do that the Vikings have had in years. So if they are not willing to, saving a first round pick in 2026 or 2025 isn't going to be the difference. But Drake May versus JJ McCarthy, that could be the difference, right? Or maybe it isn't. Or maybe JJ McCarthy ends up better than Drake May. That's certainly an outcome that's possible. So it gets a little complicated. What are you going to be able to do? But moving those teams off the pick, not necessarily as much of an issue as it was for the New England pick. It's just we're getting into the territory of what's worth it. Or do you want to just stick and pick? And that's what we'll talk about next. The other wrench in all of this, the other thing that you probably have to know about, is that other possible teams could be trading up. I don't think there's been very little reporting that I have seen on the Giants. I listen to Locked On Giants if you really want to know about it, but the only reporting that I have seen, and I apologize, I don't remember who in the New York media this was from, but it was that they are pretty interested in Drake May and maybe would get involved in that bidding war to try to move from 6 to 3, but they aren't just going to do it just to do it. And they'll be opportunistic if it comes, but otherwise they're not, they're not desperate, right? The Vikings are desperate The Vikings don't have a quarterback right now. They're desperate. The Giants are not so desperate, and they probably won't be quite as motivated. But the other team, there are a couple other teams that are kind of desperate, and they're right behind the Vikings. They are the Broncos and the Raiders. The Broncos trading up have absolutely been involved in talks to trade up, to try and trade up. And you get to this really weird dynamic where, let's say the Vikings do pull off the trade up to 3, and the Patriots have 11 and 23. Well, the Patriots need a quarterback. So they are now very motivated to trade up. They have all the assets the Vikings just had and the same attitude the Vikings just had. Who's to stop them from calling Monty Austinfort and saying, hey, what was your deal with the Vikings? We'll just take that. And then, the Cardinals get the same draft picks they would have gotten, and they're just trading with a different guy. And the Broncos are still the ones that are kind of left out to dry, or the Raiders or whoever. And so for me, this scenario or the previous one are by far the two most likely. And I don't really know which one I think is more likely between the two of them. And I'm not going to try to sit here and make a guess just because I don't want to put an idea in your head that I'm probably just saying arbitrarily. Like if I were to guess, it would be arbitrary, but it does feel like some sort of trade up is like gonna happen. And the factors deciding who it's with and who it's for have to do with, confirming who Washington picks and the Patriots kind of coming to their decision. Do they love Drake May a lot, or are they just kind of all right with him? And maybe JJ McCarthy could be good, and maybe we'll take your trade and we'll try to trade up with Arizona, and we'll, maybe we can net an extra first round pick out of that and still get a quarterback we feel happy with. Are they there? Right. And I think the only thing that can happen from like the Las Vegas and and Denver area is if they were to like throw Patrick Surtain in the trade or something like that, which it doesn't seem like they will do. I think that's kind of fictional. So that's the situation at 4 or 5. And whether or not it's 4 or 5, like maybe Arizona hangs up and says, nope, we are taking Marvin Harrison. And then you just call with the exact same offer up to the Chargers, and it's the same dynamic, right? And they'll be far less motivated to take it. Like whichever one of Arizona and the Chargers doesn't trade down gets Marvin Harrison. Fascinating little decision point up there at that point. But for the Vikings, it doesn't matter for us. If one of them takes Marvin Harrison and the other one is where the Vikings take their quarterback. It's all the same here. The only risk is if you move up to 5 and then the Broncos move up to 4 and they actually leapfrog you. But you probably wouldn't do that. You probably wouldn't be thinking about that until the Cardinals have already turned in their pick, and it is Marvin Harrison. Like nobody is going to take a trade with anybody else before calling Kwesi and seeing if he'll outbid it, because he will, and you'll get more doing that. So that's the dynamic. But then you get this stick and pick thing where maybe we just don't want to give up any draft capital at all, and we still just kind of want to keep building a good roster around whatever QB we can get. We'll talk about that next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by GameTime. It's the best place to find last-minute tickets, and GameTime is always going to be upfront with you about everything. You can see your seat view. You can see a picture of what it looks like from that seat, so you can make sure you're satisfied with the view, and they have all-in pricing upfront as well. So if you are buying tickets last minute to an event, even up to an hour into the start of that event, which is where tickets can start to get very cheap as everyone just wants to get rid of them, you can find the total price that you will pay up front. That's the whole total, everything. So it's your price at checkout. So no hidden fees, no nothing. You can find that for any sports game, but also theater, events, comedy shows, whatever you got going on in your city. You can find all of that at GameTime. Just download the GameTime app and create an account. And then you can use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So I think I've recapped all of the trading stuff that can happen. But what if they don't, right? What if they just stick at 11 and then they pick someone else at 23? What are the merits of that? What are the situations? And I guess there's two different options for how that goes down, right? One is that the Vikings decide we don't want to spend. We don't, it's not worth it. We don't want to mortgage the future on a QB who could bust, right? That's too risky. Let's keep all our picks and let's try to build a really good team. And whatever quarterback we get, they'll have a good team around him and they'll have a better chance for success. Like, that's the idea, right? There is no indication, except I guess if you really squint at that Adam Schefter report that the Texans called the Vikings and not the other way around. Like, if you do that and then jump to like 3 conclusions off of it, you can get to the perception that the Vikings don't actually want to trade up and it's all a smokescreen. But to me, that feels fairly unlikely. But there is a more likely world where we end up here, where we end up on the clock at 11 going, wow, no quarterbacks are left. We don't have J.J. McCarthy anymore, no Drake May, no Daniels. Nobody is left, and we're looking at like maybe Mike Penix, right, or Bo Nix, or we're just saying whatever, take a cornerback. And that's the world where everyone says no, where the Patriots say, nah, we're sticking and picking, where the Cardinals say, no, we're doing Marvin Harrison, where the Chargers say, yeah, we could trade down with you, or we could trade down one spot with the Giants, get a little bit of draft capital, and still get the guy we were going to draft because the Giants are going to take J.J. McCarthy. Or maybe a more realistic version of that is if the Patriots say, we're not going to take Drake May, we're going to trade down, we want J.J. McCarthy at 6, and so we're going to trade down with the Giants instead. The Giants get Drake May, Patriots are up at 6, and then they call Arizona or the Chargers and say, what about a tiny little trade up? And now they are motivated to trade up, and they outbid the Vikings for that, right? And QBs go 1, 2, 3, 4, and the Vikings are left out in the cold. That's the outcome. And I think it would have to go down that way specifically. I don't really see another way where they don't do it, because whichever of the Cardinals and Chargers don't get Marvin Harrison Jr., the Ohio State wide receiver prospect, whichever one of those guys, those teams doesn't get that guy specifically, is going to be pretty motivated to trade down, because then like lots of debate between Roma Dunze and Malik Neighbors. And then you got guys like Brian Thomas Jr. and A.D. Mitchell and all that. Like, there's lots of other receivers, and being at 11 and missing out on one guy and getting another guy instead, way less scary. The league seems way higher on Marvin Harrison, and there's a cliff after him. So whoever sticks there will take a trade up with someone. And so just having every team hang up on you and say no feels pretty impossible. But the idea that the Giants go up to 3 and it ruins the whole thing, because then the Patriots are the team you're bidding with, and then you get screwed, right? That feels like absolutely one of the outcomes that could happen. I don't think it's as likely as a trade up getting done. I think if that were the case, the Vikings would have been fighting it pretty hard this whole time. And personally, I just think that they get done what they're trying to get done, right? Like, they want it really bad, they're gonna get it. Especially because they seem pretty willing to overpay, that tends to get things done. But in that world, what happens, right? Who do we pick? Well, I'm looking at D linemen personally. There are quarterbacks like Michael Penix. Some people even say like Bo Nix goes around this area of the draft. I think with Bo Nix, that's like a really bad idea. With Michael Penix, it's just a pretty bad idea to take him at 11. That's just, those guys just aren't good enough to justify that for me. And it certainly isn't worth it here. And here's the thing that really bugs me. Like, if you just disagree with me about Penix and you think he's a good enough quarterback to just take at 11, he's actually going to be the franchise guy that leads the Vikings to the Super Bowl. Power to you. I'm not with you on that, but power to you. But if the take I don't have respect for is the one that's like scared to be great. That is, I don't want to trade up because I want to keep all my draft picks. And I know that, this quarterback is mediocre, but I just want to keep all my draft picks. And I even did a Twitter poll that was like, okay, how many of you really think Michael Penix is like worth it? That like he really is a franchise quarterback? And how many of you just want to keep the draft picks? And like, I think it was like 3/4 of people who voted on that just wanted to keep the draft picks. That were like Penix people. So that I don't respect that. Because the Vikings have made a long history of having really good teams around just fine quarterbacks, and that just not being good enough. Maybe they get lucky, they make one NFC championship a decade, and then, whatever bad thing happens in that NFC championship. But because it's the one time every decade, every single thing of that whole build is loaded onto that game, right? You think about like 38-7. The entire Zimmer era really was loaded on that game. That was the chance. That was the one chance. And you're not going to win a Super Bowl when you only get one chance a decade. You need more than that. It's just too difficult to win a Super Bowl the one time you're good every single build. Winning a Super Bowl is too difficult, and you need to take a few tries at it, right? So that build doesn't work for me. And the value of a first round pick, especially a first round pick, if the vision here is that someone like Michael Penix can make the Vikings good enough to contend for the trophy as long as he's got a good roster around him, and here's how we get one, doesn't that make the first round picks not that valuable anyways? There's like, what, pick 25? Like, come on. Or are you just really excited for the Vikings to be bad so you can finally be super stoked on draft day for something? Is that really what you want? And I do think that it's worth looking in the mirror. I'm not accusing anyone, but it's a good thing to check. Are you just looking for a reason not to get your hopes up? It's also worth mentioning that the 2025 draft class is not supposed to be very good. Supposed to be, right? Lots of things change. Guys come out of nowhere their senior years, right? Like stuff can happen. So all very much TBD. But in terms of like planning to punt this year and draft one next year is probably, you got that backwards. You should probably plan to not be able to draft one next year and put all your eggs into drafting one this year. But this is the year to do it. So that's where they're at, right? And you can then kind of daydream about maybe they take, a good pass rusher like Latu, or an interior guy like Johnny Newton out of Illinois. And then at 23, they take Cooper DeJean, the stud corner out of Iowa or something like that. And you're like, oh, look at this bolstered defense. And you got a couple pieces on defense. But if you are trying to do this with Sam Darnold, you're punting the year away. Really, the idea of sticking and picking to me is a commitment to mediocrity. So if you like mediocrity, stick and pick. Yeah, let's do Mike Penix and a pretty good roster around him. We can get third place in the NFC North and be a respectable 9-8. Or you can go for it for once. That's where I'm at. I will talk about it tomorrow. Probably you'll have questions for me, right? Send your questions. If you do, it's Twitter Tuesday tomorrow. So send your questions to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Or you can fill out the Google form, which is linked in the show notes. You can also send it to me on Twitter when I put out a call at Luke Brown NFL on Twitter. I'll put out a call for questions on Monday. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skol.